Merit Board meeting. We'll call the meeting to order. And stand for the pledge, please.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, we getting roll call?
Roger Florkowitz.
Here.
Tim Arvanitis.
Here.
Paul Petrie.
Here.
David Tarosi.
Here.
Tom Folk.
Here.
Attorney Christian Bartholomew.
Here.
Fire Chief Robert Patterson.
Here.
Deputy Fire Chief David Meyer.
Here.
Recording Secretary John Geddeman's here.
All right, moving on. First item is approval of the minutes from the Merit Board meeting of April 3rd, 2025.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion to approve those minutes.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. All right, next movement. Any correspondence from the fire department? Still none?
No correspondence.
Okay. Old business, an update on the full-time hiring for the fire department.
Yes, all the paperwork is in the hands of the state, and we're waiting for it to be reviewed by the doctor down there, and hopefully we'll get information stating we can go ahead and move forward with the hiring date.
That's for the physicals and?
Yep.
Okay.
Psychological and everything.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? All right, moving right along. New business. First is approval of the draft of the Merit Board rules, which we had worked on in the study sessions. We've been distributed copies since that meeting. Are there any questions, comments, or follow-up on the proposed Merit Board rules?
I can fill you guys in on the changes that I made since the last meeting pursuant to the suggestions at the study session. So you should have in front of you three documents that I distributed, one of which on the title you'll see it's a copy of the rules and it says draft. Another is a copy of the rules that does not say draft, and then the other is the performance rating scale. The copy of the rules that says draft, that includes highlighted changes that I've made. Unfortunately, the highlights did not print all that visibly, so I'll kind of step through each of these items to make sure to draw your attention to them. The first change that appears in this draft is on section 4B, and we had some discussion at the study session about just clarifying that it is not this body that makes the decisions on hiring budgets, available open positions, etc. Rather, that would be the town council. And I've added some language there that just makes that crystal clear, stating determinations concerning the needs of the department, i.e. the total number of members in the department and the availability of positions to be filled therein by the board, shall not be within the purview of the board, but shall be made by the town council based upon budgetary and other considerations within the scope of the authority of that body. So that basically just gets back to what we already know. This board assists with choosing the rules that serve as the basis upon which people are hired, but the decision as to how many slots there are open to fill, how much budget there is to dedicate to those slots, et cetera, that still rests with the council as it has previously. So that language was added. The next language that was added, you'll see in section 6D3, and that's the section on promotions. We had quite a discussion as to the performance record and how that would figure into the promotion decisions. The percentiles for each of those items have been adjusted, and hopefully they add up to 100%. We've got 30% for the written exam, 20% for the oral interview, 40% for the performance record, so it's 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, and 10% for the length of service. So those percentiles were changed. In particular, the substance of paragraph 6D3 was also added to, and I changed this probably a little bit more maybe than we had talked about. I think it's consistent with what the board wanted. So concerning how that performance rating score plays in, the language added was for the purposes, or modified was, for the purposes of this provision, the score for a member's performance record shall be determined by calculating the average of the member's last 4 performance ratings received. So that's basically the last 2 years if we're doing them every 6 months, which will be weighted 80% of the performance record and the average of the member's 4 previous performance ratings before the last 4, which shall be rated as 20% of the performance record. The board shall consider only those portions of a member's performance ratings carrying numerical scores in the foregoing calculation. So that latter part limits the performance rating basically to those sections 1 through 5 that we saw on the rating scale, and hopefully clarifies that any of those additional comments that may be written into the performance scale, while they clarify those ratings that were given, really the emphasis is on those objective rating criteria that we decided on. As far as the weighting within that paragraph, we had discussed more heavily weighting recent performance to acknowledge people change, and past performance may not be indicative of future results, right? Sometimes people get a lot better, and we want to acknowledge their performance in the last 4 performance ratings. After talking with Chief, I think the language that we had used previously was a bit general. It said, I think it made reference to all prior performance ratings. Well, if you've got somebody that's been with the department for 20 years,
That's a lot of data.
that's a lot. That can be really difficult to, and those performance ratings may have been based on different scales in use at different times, or maybe they didn't even have a scale at some point. So Chief and I felt like this was a kind of a good compromise. It heavily weights towards those last 4 performance ratings, but then it does acknowledge the period prior, giving that a weight of 20%. So that was the change in that section.
And I had concerns after I left the meeting last time. It dawned on me with that issue of how far back do we go, and the fact that we've now kind of seen 3 drafts of the latest performance rating scale, is that if we continue to look at that long history for somebody who'd been around a long time, it could take a decade or more to flush that through so that there was apples to apples. I do like the change here, so that basically within 4 years, adopting a current rating, we aren't trying to parse together what did the rating from 5, 6, 7 years make. So from this point forward, after 4 years, everything will be to kind of the new scale.
So I have one question. What happens if we have an opening within a year here or something, and this is set for 2 years, an average of 2 years? What are we gonna do?
Well, just so you know, we do have a list that's active right now from the previous promotions that we did. So we do have one, what is it, the captain or lieutenants and the battalion chiefs that still, or the captains, that are still open for 2 years.
Is that acceptable to everybody?
I think for the purposes of trying to get this, put to bed to make the rules that we need, this is as good a solution as we can find. I think that we can get to those specific promotion suggestions because there's going to have to be an asterisk to this, as I just mentioned. There's no way to look at the previous rating. It's going to take us a little more, for the next 4 years, there's going to have to be a little more in-depth review and make sure that we can look at that. Because if we can't fit that criteria exactly to the last reviews, then clearly the math's not going to do. And again, I think this is the cleanest way to get it done quickly, but it's going to take us some time to go through for any promotions over that next, immediate period.
I just want to clarify. So do you have the list already set for the promotions, not using this scale? Or if a promotion came up, you would be able to go back and use what we...
You have a
put in
list for
place?
suggested promotions currently?
Right, so we just did a promotions just before this board was put together. We talked about that in the beginning. January, yeah. In January.
Okay.
There's a list of people on that rated already from their interviews and everything that was done. So that is, and like you said, it's a 2-year list. It's current from how the hiring process was done before.
Right,
And
so
as
we're going
you
to have to
said-
use a slightly different criteria because those tests and those scales may not fit the
Right,
that area,
because
but
prior
we
we
have
did
the
not
same,
use-
we have the same categories basically, though.
Right, we did not use the performance ruling sheets at the time. That's something that's just been starting in our system. So it's not, it hasn't been in place for that many years already.
Right.
The lists
is all
per
new.
statute, if I'm not mistaken, are valid. That's actually a statutory provision that the list stays valid for that 2-year period, right?
Right.
So, given the fact that those lists were already validly decided upon by the previous system, essentially, I think we're good with regard to those, and this would be applicable to any updates to the list. How plausible is it that people get promoted sooner than a 2 or a 4-year cycle? Does that happen frequently, or?
No, it doesn't.
Okay.
It doesn't. Unless somebody leaves or gets demoted for some reason, but normally we haven't had changes in a long time, except for, we just did a lot of moving in staff and that with the approval to hire one additional. That's what we did, is we did put a new assistant chief in the position as John has taken that, and then we had a battalion chief spot open up, and then once we finished that, then we had a
Right,
lieutenant
backfill
spot
up.
open. So, yeah, so it was spots open up because of the move up. So that's why it was all done. But otherwise, yeah, it could be years before we have another one.
Okay.
I'll go on record saying I'm not fond of the idea, but I'll go along with it.
I guess what is it that we can do alternatively
Well, you
to
just
what's
put a provision in
existing?
here that if an opening comes up within a year, you use the evaluations
I don't,
from now until a year from now. Like if you've had 2 evaluations a year
you want
from
to
now,
make
you
that
use those
amendment
2.
to that,
I-
to.
You know,
yeah,
if you guys are
literally
fine with it,
specify
it's
that.
okay, but
Well, I guess the big thing is, to the point of making sure the concern is addressed, let's make a modification to the rules that we're saying that specifically addresses that if we'd like to, because there does have to be, as I acknowledged when I first mentioned, is that there has to be some semblance through this transition to go from the old scale to the new scale. As I said, 4 years, we know we'll be at that point, and there will be a non-issue.
that's a long way.
Maybe we need to put in an asterisk on this, that anything between now and the next 4 years until that scale is fully implemented is going to take some, it's going to be a hybrid, because it's going to be based on that list that you have, and then from years 3 and 4, it's going to be a different potential list if openings exist, which I guess is that's the part where we actually get to do our job to, question and review those things. But maybe we need to say that explicitly, that in that transition period, there's going to have to be some board interaction in those approval processes that may require this specific section where we're doing hard numbers.
that a possibility
to
to do
be,
that tonight?
yeah, to be adjusted by the board because we don't have a rating system going back to that level.
Just so you know, the system was done and it was approved with the Board of Safety at the time, so it wasn't just the fire department that did that. It's
Right.
also signed by the Board of Safety in that, so it is official. I mean, I know it was done under a different system, and I understand your question.
So I guess what I would say with regard to that, if we've got a couple of options. The statute does set a time frame by which we're supposed to have the rules implemented. However, that being said, I don't think that there's anything that would happen if, we were, let's say, a week or two after that when we actually pass them, because
Well, I guess, again, this gets back to the question we started with in the last study session was, I see this more of a clarification rather than something that would require a reposting, because we specifically know we've set a brand-new system with a brand-new period, and now it's been addressed, and the question came up. It seems like it's just a clarification to say that there's going to have to be some board interaction in those promotions and discussions that may not fit that scale over the next 4 years.
So the question that I would have is, if we're going to present it, if we're going to notice it and present it, then I think we can do that by approving the document as amended. But if we are going to do that, then I want to make sure that I have the specific intent of the board for that amendment. Like we pin down exactly what we want in there today, so that I can come up with the amended document and then distribute that for the public meeting, and it will have already been approved by you guys for that distribution.
Okay.
If I go back to my office and I make some changes that I think will work, but I'm not sure of, then it puts us in a weird position because you guys haven't actually approved the change that I made first. So specifically, how do we want to deal with that situation if we get a promotion that comes up? Well, we already have an approved list, right?
Yes.
And that is good for 2 years, effective when?
When did you get approved?
Yeah, I don't know the date right offhand. I didn't know it was going to be a question, but it was December or January when the list was put together.
When it was approved?
Approved by the
Right.
Board of Safety. Yeah.
But again, that list, if one person's removed from the hierarchy, then the backfilling begins, and that list gets updated, next Tuesday. We don't know when that, it stands for 2 years in its current form, but it could be updated if there's 3 people that retire or leave the department. So it doesn't just stand where you say, oh, well, those are the promotions, they're set, that's the only positions. That is fluid and can change in that time depending on what positions open up then.
Right, and that's strictly the captain's position. So
Captain's position only, yeah.
Right. And so I guess that's the part there. I think we need to just have a simple point of clarification that maybe just states that in the interim period from the time as of the adoption of these regulations until the point at the end of the 4-year period where the standardization is set, there's going to have to be a hybrid review or hybrid system, some terminology along that way, that will have to be in place,
put it on this. They got
which specifically addresses the intent of what we did with these hard numbers and those percentages, but not having a numbering system that matches that. We'll have to do something in the interim, and I think that's going to just be board discussion as those individuals come up, and it's going to have to be weighted. So again, the asterisk is this can't apply for 4 years. I mean, and this just can't work until we have 4
Well,
years of data.
It could, if you made it where, let's say there's an opening after 6 months. So we just use one group of ratings for the first 6 months. If there's an opening a year from now, you're gonna use an average of the first 2 sets of ratings. If there's an opening 18 months from now, you use an average of 3 of them.
But what he's saying is that there isn't a set of ratings that matches, the
sorry?
wording that we have here doesn't have a set of ratings. There's nothing in place now that matches the rating system.
There
so-
will be. After 6 months, they'll be using the system. that
Right,
we-
but you only have one rating, and again, I don't think
Exactly,
that
that's what-
captures, until the 4 years is done, this language is almost, it doesn't mean anything to
And
me.
it shouldn't. That's why I'm saying I don't like it. If
Okay.
we put this in place, it should be implemented and used. You know, we're just pushing it down the road for 4 years and
We
using
had
the
a
old
time machine,
system.
I agree, but we can't go
mean,
back and redo
Well, we
those
can.
reviews.
We can set it in here saying that if an opening comes up in 6 months, we use the first set of ratings. If it comes up in a year, we use an average of the 2 sets of ratings. Because this is set up after 4 sets of ratings, you take an average of it, correct?
Are we allowed to even make this change, but since they already have a list set?
So
I
we're,
understand moving forward, but
yeah,
there's a
they
list
have
that-
a,
that-
they have a
that can't be
list that has
compromised.
been approved.
Yeah, so we,
And-
For the one immediate position as those flush through. Again,
Well,
if
that's-
If that could change in a week, and that list is no longer valid, so. Whether it's approved for 2 years, if those positions get changed as department, changes are made, people get, die or retire, change jobs, that list then has to be updated, and then it has to be reapproved.
So Chief, maybe it would be helpful could you tell us, as you've done as you have done promotions in the past, you've got your 2-year list, right? People have been added to that. How often would you update that list with additional names?
Never.
Not until it expires or you run out of names on it.
So the prior practice is basically, you've got your 2-year list, and you work through all the names on that list until you're out of names, and then you update the list
For
again?
that position, yeah.
And the list
But we
pertains,
never formed the list unless we knew a position was open. So we don't, it's not like we do interviews all the time just to have a list. When a position opens, that's when we would do interviews and everything, so do the process, I should say.
and there's a list for each position?
No.
Only the
The-
open positions.
The only
That's
ones
what
that
I'm
we
saying.
had
They don't have a depth chart like a NFL team where they have the board.
So
that has
then
everybody
there
going
isn't
in.
the list right now.
There is a list
The
for
list
the
for those
captains.
specific
openings you
open
have.
positions.
We don't have a list. We just did. We
Yeah.
just did all the promotions.
Right.
So the list was created because of that.
So now that list is no longer valid.
No, the list is still good for 2 years.
Because there's still names on that list that.
They were
there was
rated.
Five people that applied for the captain's position. So
Right,
we
for
went
that
through all
one
the interview
job.
process.
It doesn't
and
have a whole
everything.
depth chart
We
across.
picked, yeah, we picked
That's what I'm
one, so there's
saying.
still 4, I think 4 people on that list. And they were ranked and scored. So if there is ever an opening, we would go to the number
For
2 guy.
that,
on
but
the
for that one job.
For the captain's
For that
job, yes.
captain's job, so.
But if
that's
there's a
what I'm saying.
battalion chief,
Overall,
then we have to go through the whole process for a battalion chief. If it's a lieutenant or whatever position opens, you'd have to do a process, just
Right.
like a normal. It just happens that we haven't had to use a list or done anything in so
Yeah.
long. This was just the first time in a while that we've had this type of situation. So,
Did-
and in
did
the past,
that
it's the same thing when we did it, and then if the list expired, the list was done because it was past its time.
Did that include any element of performance rating on it when it was,
No, it
when it was
wasn't.
done? It didn't, okay. So, right now, we've got a list for one position that had openings, fair?
That is correct.
Okay, and no others,
No others.
right? Okay. And we've got this performance rating scale, but has this been in use or something similar to this been in use for the last 2 years, 4 years, whatever?
Not consistently. That's what I was telling you guys in the beginning of all this, that
Okay.
we had the evaluation form, but it wasn't done on a consistent scale like we're trying to get it into play now.
When was Val promoted? 2 years ago? 3 years ago?
all right, brain trust, what did you guys come up with?
When was Val promoted, like 4 years ago?
go ahead and make that
I guess
suggestion.
if a promotion becomes necessary in the next 4 years, it would just have to be reviewed by the board on a case-by-case basis until we have all
Until the data that matches the way the rule is
rule
written.
would
That's what I'm
You'll
saying.
be there,
I
yeah.
think it's just a point of clarification with an asterisk that says, until we have the full 4 years, this rule cannot take effect until we have that full 4 years, because there's also provisions that say people coming from other departments with previous experience can bypass some of those things in the other rules because of their previous experience and things, and can be hired into positions that would then bypass the traditional entry roles.
Well, that's not for the performance ratings, though.
Right, it's
I
not,
think that's applicable.
but that's for, as far as a promotion availability, there's other avenues, so it's not just, I guess it's not, we look at the, it's not assembling, step by step. We just can't use this data as it exists. The equation can't be filled out until we have that part. There's enough data. So I think that we're gonna have to do a little more, intervention. What was the phrase that you used when you had said that it's case by case? So I think the case by case basis, there are gonna be questions, and that's where we would have to go through and look at this rating and then try to build that. The intent of this is to make sure we have a performance record that weights things accordingly to that level. And as far as the performance reviews, we would have to just put together what we believe, and at the board at the time, whether it's 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years out, the board is going to have to determine that one line item for section 3 of that. There's just,
Back to
I
very
see no other.
subjective again. Very subjective.
I understand. I guess
What-
if I
what-
had a time machine again, we
Oh.
could go back 4 years, but there's no way, until that
There's an old
case
saying
comes
I like to
up,
say, but I can't do it on TV.
Well-
But,
I just don't see that there's any way to go back. You can't recreate something from nothing, and if we can't do that as a
start
board.
from now and work forward.
Right,
So if
which
we
is what
start
that
at
rule
0
does.
with no list, and it's 6 months, if something comes up, you use the ratings for the first 6 months.
I don't agree with using it just 6 months, 1 month. I think the intent of this is very clear, that we take 4 years of ratings, regardless of what those numbers are. If we get 5 people sitting here and we read that rule, it says, 2 years of previous is rated for that amount, and 2 years is rated for a lesser amount. If the 5 of us can't sit here and review that and get that intent, again, this is an asterisk and it's a half a sentence clarification. It's up to the board, it's our job to make sure that we are able to implement a 4-year record with 80% being the last 2, 20% being the previous, regardless of whether it's an essay, whether it's things. We can't do it with the numbers. This can't be done according to the numbers, because you don't have a number system now.
How about this? What if we said something like, in the event a 4 years of, or 8 prior performance ratings are unavailable, a performance rating will be formulated at the recommendation of the department and approved by the board on a case-by-case basis.
Again,
like
I
that.
think that we need to just address that this rule says 2 years, basically in effect, 2 years is going to count towards 80%. So the most recent 2 years will count more than the previous 3 and 4. And if we can't figure out how to do that, yeah, there's not a weighting system. But again, that still seems pretty clear. If there's 4 or 8 or 6 performance reviews and we look at them, we don't have numbers, I can certainly tell the difference between the last 2 years and the previous 2 years and determine these should be 4 times more important, which is what the rule says, than the next 2 years. I don't need numbers, I don't need this stuff. It seems, to me, it seems maybe common sense, but we just need to capture the spirit of what this says, and I think I just defined what that spirit is 4 years of performance ratings. Anything beyond that doesn't seem to matter. It's almost the way this is now written, and the wording that you had worked with Mr. Bartholomew to come up with, flushed out 5 years and beyond performance ratings have no bearing. I mean, that's what we basically have with this change. Anything from years 5 through 25 don't count towards this calculation, right? Is there anybody else who doesn't see that that's what this rule says? So if we're not looking at those previous, 20 years, 15, 10, if we look at the last 4, regardless of the system, all this says is that the board has to give more weight, more importance to the previous 2 years than years 3 and 4. And it has to be that much more important for that. And again, if it happens, when it happens, I think that's just a point of clarification. We just need to capture the spirit of what this says, or we're going to get in the weeds. If we start saying 1 year, and then there's 2 years, and then if it happens in 18 months, that overly complicates, that's more complicated than the original rule that we came up with in the first place.
So my question, is everybody content with Mr. Bartholomew's verbiage?
So here's, I'll put it out there again. So this is just a paraphrase, but this would be the substance, basically. In the event that 8 years of performance ratings are unavailable,
8 performance,
sorry,
yeah,
eight performance ratings, which would be
4 years.
4
4
years.
years, yep.
Yeah, using the current scaled system, the point system.
Right. A performance rating shall be recommended by the fire department and approved by the board, taking into consideration all ratings that are available. So, 2 years, or let's say 2 ratings down the line, somebody comes up for promotion, and we've got 2 of their ratings, so we can definitely consider those, but we don't have the data for the prior ones to have it operate under this rubric. Then the fire department would make a recommendation on, based on whatever criteria you use for your performance ratings, to the board as to what those prior ratings ought to be, and the board would consider those with the ratings that are available and assign a performance score, basically.
All right. Fine. I'm a little slow, so walk me through this. Our current promotion thing that we have here says 4 performance ratings. So that's 2 years worth. Where are we coming up with 4 years? Where are we coming up with 8 performance ratings?
So
Eight was because,
Before, right? That was 2 years prior.
so it was 2 year, or the 2 years for 4. And then if they had, we would also go back a second 2 years if they had back then and use those, but it was a lower, it was 20%, I believe. Those would be as an effect, instead of going back 20 years, which we don't have 20 years of this scale, so. But once it becomes into play, it's just saying that you can use the first 2 years, and then you use the second 2 years after that, or before that, that would be at 20%.
Until we get up to
Giving
speed
you that
with the
100%.
system. Because
What's
this
that?
system is based on 2 years, right?
4.
It's 4
4 it would
performance
finally
ratings, so
fly.
it's-
It's
It's
8
4
performance
years.
reviews.
It's 4 years because so there's
2 years and 2 years.
There's
So
a
80%
performance
for
rating
2 years and 20%
every
for 2
6
years.
months. There's going to be a performance rating. So what we wanted to do was weight the more recent ones more heavily, and then look at the stuff in the past, take it into account, but not as heavily. So what this language does that's in here right now is it says we look at the last 4 performance ratings, so that's the last 2 years,
Okay.
and that gets 80% of the weight
Gotcha.
of the performance rating. Then we look at the 4 performance ratings before that, and that gets
Okay.
20%.
20%.
Gotcha. Thank you. Apologize, a little slow.
And what we would be saying with the amended language is basically, we acknowledge that some folks aren't going to have the full 8 ratings. Maybe they'll have 2 or 3, and because we're lacking, those decisions would come before the board. The fire department would make a recommendation.
Right, hopefully following the spirit of what we said, which
Right.
was the previous 2 years was more important than the 2 years before that.
Taking into account
That's
the
the
ratings
spirit
that
of
we
it.
do have in hand, and, if those were 4 of them, then great, we've got our 80%, and the only thing we'd have to consider is that 20%, bit. But then it would come before the board to actually approve the performance rating that the fire department recommends because there isn't enough information.
Right. And we have to approve the list anyway in order.
You have to
for-
approve
before
the list
Before the
anyway,
promotion
yeah.
is made.
And everything we're saying does not apply to the captain's list right now, because that's already set. Nothing we can do about that, right? Am I clear?
That would be my take on it,
Motion's
yeah.
been filled for that job,
Yeah.
and now just the people behind that are still waiting. If that job opens again in the next 2 years,
None
it
of this
just fills
applies.
in. Right, that doesn't
Right.
even matter for
Right.
that one position.
Okay.
I don't think it should.
No, I'm not saying it
Start
should.
from- I mean, I think
I'm
it
just
should start
making,
from now.
making a point of clarification, yep.
I don't think we should keep the old list, but that's just
Well, it's
me.
by statute, we have to
can't,
keep the
yeah.
two lists
Just
once
say
it's
we
been
have
approved.
to, or we can, we may.
What the statute says, and I don't have the whole thing right in front of me. Let me see
Whatever,
if
you guys-
that's,
That's what you guys want anyway.
if that's addressed by the, so here's what it says. The eligibility list for a position consists of members who have been placed on the list in order of their cumulative score on all rating factors. The eligibility list shall be maintained for 2 years from the date of certification, after which time the list shall be retired and a new list established.
Okay, so we have to use them.
So I think we're stuck with it.
Yeah, you don't have the stuff to make a new list anyway yet, so it's, yeah, it is what it is.
I'm prepared to make a motion.
All right.
Do you know what the verbiage is gonna be?
So that was the next change.
Oh, I meant-
Yeah, let me kind of step through the other ones, and then we can decide if we want to accept it as amended. So the next change was to 12C, and that's a pretty simple one. I added a line that says, "The board shall conduct a review of these rules and all forms and evaluative criteria for members specified herein at least annually."
Okay.
Yeah.
Any comments on that item?
God, no.
The remaining changes are to be found in the addendum to the rules, which should be page 10. And what I did there is,
Page 9 and 10.
is it 9 and 10?
Yeah.
It might be a little bit different on, I've got it on page 10, but,
Page break occurred on there, yeah, so the addendum starts for me at the top of.
Starts on 9.
yeah, mine starts on page 10, but it says addendum, so. Everything on that addendum was added, but it shouldn't be new information. So, the addendum provides more specific rubrics for scoring that were not necessarily spelled out in the rules. For example, section 4D2 states, it talks about the oral component shall be graded by 2 members of the pension board, 2 members of the board, who shall assign competitive scores to each applicant based on a scoring rubric formulated by the board. So it makes reference to that scoring rubric. Now, the reason I thought it might be good to put that on an addendum is if we did find out that something wasn't working, then instead of changing the body of the rules, we change the addendum. So that 4D2, I've called that the general aptitude test oral component. That's part of the initial hiring process. And this is from information that the chief had given us previously about how it actually is being done right now.
That was based on what the Board of Safety has been doing previously for the scoring. That's what these specific areas
This
are
specific
basically.
one was from that new system that we just used for the first time.
Right.
the online.
Determine where those
applica-
scores were.
Yes,
Right.
that's how all that, that's what that part's all about.
And the intent being that we're going to use that in the four, but this just formalizes and literally describes the definition of what those are.
Yeah.
rather than having to look at the website of the place that's.
And the
putting it.
reasoning for that is I didn't want to specifically include, I guess, some of the materials that the fire department uses as they're administering this, but since there's supposed to be a rule, and since we said that the board would approve a rubric, I think this provides a rubric, a scoring rubric, that we can use. And it also provides maybe a little bit of flexibility there as to what the actual scoring of the test looks like. So right now, what it states is each evaluator shall score, and there's 4 evaluators for this, 2 of you guys and 2 from the pension board. Each evaluator shall score a candidate's responses to 4 predetermined questions on a scale from 1 to 100, with 100 being the highest score, using 10-point increments. The average of all 4 scores for each evaluator shall constitute a candidate's score on the oral component of the test. And that is the system that's in use right now. So this basically just says we are going to use that scoring system going forward for that oral component. Similarly, Section 4D3, that is for the in-person oral interview component, which is also part of that initial round of hiring. We have the video interviews, which is what the first section pertains to, and that's administered with the help of the third-party vendor. And then we have the oral interviews, which are face-to-face. In-person oral interviews, we're sticking with the same system, conducted by 2 members of the board and 2 members of the pension board. The interview shall consist of 20 questions, which is what they've been doing now. Each evaluator shall determine the candidate's score on each question by assigning a score between 1 and 5, with 5 being the highest, 1 being the lowest, such that the candidate's total score on the in-person oral interview component shall range from 20 as the lowest score. That's if all 4 folks gave 1s on each of the questions.
Didn't we go through all this in the study session? Or is this all new?
I don't think it's new. At the last study session, we basically said that we were going to stick with, as far as these portions, stick with what works.
Current
basically,
scoring system that they used on the last time, but we didn't have that.
Do we
what-
need to go through all these publicly?
Well,
Is that
the
why you're
difference
reading them all?
is that we didn't have it, we didn't know, they knew what the scoring was based on. We just had numbers, and they said the scoring system worked. We had not been addressed to how those numbers had been calculated.
This just
previously.
formalizes
Right.
what's being done.
It defines what
Okay.
they did.
I'm just trying to cut to the chase here, gentlemen.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
All that was given to you, the scoring system was given to you guys. I sent that to you guys with all the numbers, how it was all calculated.
Yeah, it wasn't added to the addendum to the rules, which is what he was trying to do to get it all
Yeah,
in
so
one
if
document.
we're adopting a rubric, I just want to make sure that the rubric gets voted on, and by including that in this,
We've
it would
checked
be.
that box.
Yeah. So that formalizes the current system for the in-person oral interviews for appointments to the department. The one below that pertains to promotions and the oral interviews that are used for promotions. And, keep in mind, I think that's only 20% of the promotion score, something like that. And again, what this does is it just formalizes the system that's in use. So right now, they do those oral interviews based on 20 questions formulated by the department, and they use that same way of scoring, the 1 to 5, 5 being the best score, 1 being the least, with a maximum score of 100 points on all of those 20 questions. There's an additional section on that oral interview for promotion that is less tangible, so to speak, but no less important, at least I would say. And that is, you've got your 100 questions, or 100 points for the questions that were asked, and you've got another 20 points where they judge, does the person look like a schlub? Do they present themselves well? Do they come across as confident? Those kind of, they're less tangible, but I think we can all acknowledge that those things are important. However, I'd point out that's 20 points out of a total 120, and that's only 20% of the total promotion score. So that element is not probably going to flip the decision for anybody. But that is the system they've been using now. So I've described it here based on the description provided
And we'll
to
have
me
to
by
define
Chief.
schlub. So-
That was also presented to you guys. You have
Yeah.
all those paperwork.
The definition of schlub, so that way we can check that box.
Well, fortunately, I don't think we have any schlubby firefighters in the room, so we don't have an example that we can draw on here. But that's what that section does. And then next, Section 10B, which was added, merely incorporates by reference this performance rating scale that is the third document that you've been given, and states that that is officially part of the performance rating, and each of those sections, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, are weighted as 20% of the performance rating, which is also what we discussed at the study session. Those are the changes.
Do we hear any further comments or questions regarding approval of the draft merit board rules? If not, I'd like to hear any motions.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion on the verbiage presented this evening by way of Mr. Bartholomew, as presented.
Any seconds?
I'll second.
Second? All in favor?
Aye.
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 Mr. Fall?
Thank you, everyone.
Aye?
Yeah,
Yeah, okay.
Aye.
All right, unanimous.
Thought my second was good enough.
Motion carries. The draft merit board rules are approved.
Okay, so the next step then would be we take this preliminary approval, so to speak, and we will distribute the rules as amended. And I think the only amendment that we mentioned is that one section. So I will amend that consistent with what we've discussed today. Copies will go out to the town council, to the chief, and to the town clerk. And then we will need to decide on a date for the meeting, the public meeting, when we will hear public comments on these. And after hearing the public comments, that's when we would vote on final approval. And unless, of course, the public has something great to say that causes you guys to say, we didn't think of that, let's make a change. You can do that at or after the public meeting. But
What date would be needed in order to meet the statutory requirements as of now?
so it's a little bit unclear, but based on my last calculations, I was shooting for either the 22nd or sooner. Now, we have to give 10 days notice of the meeting, and the rules have to be distributed 10 days prior to that meeting. And I'll also say that notice of that meeting will have to be published. That's the only part that I'm a little bit unsure of is, when we go to put it in the paper, how long might that take? for them to actually get it in the paper and circulate. So,
Suffice it to say, at this point, we would need to have a special meeting of the board. We can't wait until the June meeting.
from a legal perspective, I would say we're supposed to have the rules in place by the 22nd.
That was my understanding as well.
I will also say there is no penalty or consequence specified in the statute if they are not fully finalized by that time frame. And having provided that advice, I would defer to the board as to, what your actual decision is.
Are there any persons with specific concerns about having an earlier meeting before the 22nd, or would there be a tendency to want to wait until the June meeting scheduled for the normal Thursday time? Anyone? Comments? Tom? Start there.
2 more weeks give people a lot more time to consider what we're presenting. So I say the first Thursday in June would be plenty good enough.
Considering I can't make the 22nd, I'm fine with the June 5th.
First Thursday in June as well.
So that would be June 5th.
Yep.
You guys, any thoughts, comments? That works with you?
Yeah, I'm fine.
Yeah, we're good.
Right, so
June 5th.
would someone like to make a motion about
Yeah.
carrying
Make a
this?
motion we
on.
consider us at the June 5th meeting for public expression.
It'll be after the Board of Safety.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Okay, I'll make them.
Yeah, make a motion that we would then defer this, provide the posting so that Mr. Bartholomew has the timing, and that any formal board approval would not occur until the next Board of Safety meeting after the 21st or 22nd, which would be the first Thursday of June. Anyone care to make that motion?
So moved.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes.
All right, so I will take care of getting the notices in the paper for that and getting the proposed draft of the rules distributed to everyone.
That will be June 5th. What day is it? Thursday.
That's right.
Okay, moving on, reports, we're showing fire department had no reports to make. Is that still the case?
Could I add one thing?
Certainly.
So today is firefighter EMT Aaron Anderson's final shift after 27 years with the Schererville Fire Department. So I'd just like to announce that and say thank you, Aaron, and we're going to miss him, and I hope he enjoys his retirement.
Absolutely.
Great.
That's all I had.
All right. Any comments from the board members?
I've got a question for the chief. When do the budget talks start with the town council?
That should be coming up here, I believe, in early June, July.
And
Suggest you talk to a council member and find out the specifics of that,
she tells me what to do.
would be my suggestion.
Being a novice to this and everything, when you're going to be involved in those discussions, or they just tell you what they can give you?
No, we get to be involved in that.
Okay. And what message can we send to the town council about adding more firefighters to the fire department?
None. I always do that.
Senate Bill 1.
Yep, Senate Bill 1 is actually going to be affecting all our departments
gotcha.
very badly.
Good point.
So it's going to probably be a very mute, but
Pain.
yeah. So it's going to be
Mean.
it's going to be a rough couple of years coming up.
I understand. Okay, thank you.
Yep.
All right. Any business from the floor? Nobody's hiding behind the pulpit? Okay. And anyone like to make a motion for adjournment?
Absolutely. I make a motion, we adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Meeting adjourned.
Thank you.